The thing about living in Minnesota is that winter gives you way too much free time to be creative, which is exactly how I ended up with 47 snowmen scattered across what I thought was my property line, until HOA President Brenda Patterson started screaming at me from her minivan at 7 in the morning. I'm Alex Norris, and I'd been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Edna for about 3 years when this whole mess started. My wife Sarah had taken our 2 kids to visit her parents in Phoenix for winter break, leaving me alone with our golden retriever Murphy and approximately 8 feet of accumulated snow from the relentless January storms. I work from home as a software developer, which meant I had flexible hours and apparently way too much time on my hands. It started innocently enough. I built one snowman on the front lawn, then another. Then I got ambitious and created a whole winter village scene. By day 5 of my solitary snowman construction project, I had an entire army of frozen sentinels lined up along the property boundary between my lot and the empty wooded area next door. Some were traditional 3-ball snowmen with carrot noses and button eyes. Others were more elaborate, sculptural pieces that I'd spent hours perfecting. I'd given a few of them stick arms positioned in various poses, created some snow dogs, even attempted a snow dragon that came out looking more like a lumpy alligator, but I was proud of it anyway. The lot next to mine had been empty since we moved in. It was about an acre of mixed hardwoods and brush, completely undeveloped, with a small clearing where I'd occasionally see deer in the early morning. The property line was marked by old survey stakes I'd found when we first bought the house, and I'd been careful to keep my Snowman Army on my side of those stakes, extending them about 15 feet into my own yard. That Friday morning, I was adding the finishing touches to Snowman number 47, a portly fellow with pinecone buttons and a scarf I'd sacrificed from my winter collection, when I heard the screech of tires on our quiet cul-de-sac. Brenda's white Honda Odyssey came to an aggressive stop at the curb, and she practically fell out of the driver's seat in her haste. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her face already red despite the 15-degree temperature. Brenda was in her late 40s with the signature Karen haircut, that asymmetrical bob that's shorter in the back and longer in the front, highlighted in shades that probably had names like Caramel Sunrise or Golden Wheat. She wore a puffy North Face jacket that was clearly expensive and yoga pants that suggested she'd either just come from the gym or wanted everyone to think she had. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, staying calm. "Just building some snowmen, making use of all this snow." "Those," she pointed dramatically at my frozen creations, "are on HOA property, common area property. You cannot build structures on common area property without board approval, and you certainly cannot create this monstrosity that's visible from the street and bringing down everyone's property values." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "Brenda, these are all on my property." I checked the survey stakes. Everything's on my side of the line. "No," she said, her voice getting even shriller. "No, that entire wooded area, including the 15-foot buffer zone extending into what you think is your lot, was designated as HOA common space. It's in the covenants. You need to tear all of these down immediately, or I'll be forced to fine you $50 per day per violation." I felt my jaw tighten. That's not what my property survey says. When we bought this house, we had it surveyed. I own right up to those stakes, and these snowmen are well within my boundary. "Your survey is wrong," Brenda snapped. "The HOA board voted 2 years ago to extend our common space to include buffer zones around all undeveloped lots. It's for the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. You can't just vote to take people's property, Brenda. It's not taking, it's managing. And you signed the covenants when you bought this house, which means you agreed to abide by all current and future HOA decisions. Now tear down these eyesores before I call our attorney." She stomped back to her minivan, spraying slush as she peeled away. Murphy, who'd been watching the whole exchange from our front porch, gave a single bark that seemed to sum up my feelings perfectly. I went inside and immediately called my real estate attorney, Jim Morrison, who had kept on retainer after a previous run-in with the HOA over the color of my mailbox. They'd wanted regulation black. I'd painted it burgundy to match our shutters. That battle had taken 3 months and several $100s in legal fees before they backed down. "Alex," Jim said when he picked up, "tell me Brenda hasn't found a new windmill to tilt at." I explained the situation, and I could practically hear him pulling up files on his computer. "Hold on, let me look at your property documents and the HOA covenants you signed at closing." I waited, listening to the clicking of his keyboard and Murphy's contented snoring from his bed by the fireplace. "Okay," Jim said finally. "So, your property definitely extends to where you think it does. The survey is clear, and it matches the county records. As for the HOA covenants, there's language about respecting common areas, but nothing about buffer zones or the HOA having authority to unilaterally extend those areas." So she's wrong. She's very wrong. But here's the thing, Alex. You need to request the meeting minutes from 2 years ago when she claims this vote happened. If they actually did vote to extend common areas onto private property, that's a much bigger problem than snowmen. How big a problem? The kind that involves property theft and potential fraud. You can't just declare someone's land is now HOA common space. It doesn't work that way, not legally. They'd need easements, they'd need property owner consent, they'd need to file with the county. This isn't a game of Monopoly. I thanked Jim and hung up, then immediately sent a formal email to the HOA board requesting copies of all meeting minutes from the past 3 years, as was my right under Minnesota HOA law. I CC'd Jim on the email, making it clear I had legal representation. Brenda responded within 20 minutes. Meeting minutes are available for review at the monthly board meeting. Next meeting is February 10th. Jim responded to her response before I could. Minnesota Statute 515B.3118 requires associations to provide copies of meeting minutes to owners within 10 business days of a written request. Please comply with state law. That seemed to shut her up, at least temporarily. The weekend passed quietly. I added 3 more snowmen to my army, including one that I styled to look like it was reading a book, a newspaper I'd waterproofed held in its stick hands. Sarah called from Phoenix and laughed when I sent her pictures of my snowman village. "You're such a dork," she said affectionately. "The kids are going to love it when we get back." "When's that again?" "Wednesday. We're flying back Wednesday afternoon. Don't burn the house down before then." No promises. Monday morning, I found an official HOA violation notice taped to my front door. Brenda had documented 47 separate violations, one for each snowman, at $50 per day each. According to her math, I was already racking up daily fines of $2,350. I took a picture of the notice and texted it to Jim. He called me back immediately. "Don't pay anything. This is harassment. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter." "Is it worth getting the media involved?" I asked. "Because this is insane enough that I bet the local news would eat it up." "Let's hold off on that for now, but keep it in your back pocket." Tuesday, the meeting minutes arrived via email. Jim and I reviewed them together over a video call. The document from the supposed vote 2 years ago was 3 pages long and referenced expansion of aesthetic buffer zones to preserve property values and neighborhood character. "This is interesting," Jim said, scrolling through the PDF. "Look at the vote tally." I looked. The measure had passed 3-2. The 3 yes votes were from Brenda Patterson, Gregory Hoffman, and Linda Richardson. The 2 no votes were from Michael Torres and Susan Fleming. "Okay, so what am I missing?" I asked. "Look at the property descriptions for the buffer zones. They list specific lot numbers that would be affected." I scanned the list. My lot number, 247, wasn't on it, but lot 248 was. That was the empty wooded lot next to mine. So they voted to extend common space into the empty lot, not mine. Correct. But here's where it gets interesting. Jim's face on the screen looked serious. The property description for lot 248 doesn't match the county records. According to this HOA document, lot 248 extends 15 feet into what the county says is lot 247. Your lot. How is that possible? It's not possible legally. Someone either made a mistake with the property description, or they deliberately falsified it. Either way, the HOA is claiming ownership of land that belongs to you, and they've been claiming it for 2 years. What do I do? We need to get a new survey done officially through the county. And we need to see if there are any other property records the HOA has filed that might affect your deed. This could be an honest mistake, or it could be fraud. We need to find out which. I arranged for a county surveyor to come out Thursday morning. Sarah and the kids would be home by then, which was good because I had a feeling things were about to get complicated. Wednesday evening, Sarah walked in with 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Josh, both of whom immediately ran to the windows to see the Snowman Army. "Dad, this is awesome." Josh shouted, "Can we build more?" "Let's wait a bit on that, buddy," I said, hugging them both. Emma was already putting her boots back on, eager to get outside. Sarah raised an eyebrow at me. "What's going on?" I filled her in on the Brenda situation while the kids bundled up and ran outside with Murphy. Sarah's expression went from amused to concerned to angry in the span of about 5 minutes. She's trying to steal our property. We don't know if it's intentional yet. Jim thinks it might be a surveying error that they made when they voted on the buffer zone extension. 15 feet of property on an acre lot isn't a surveying error, Alex. That's thousands of square feet. That's what $15,000 of property value. More. She was right, of course. Sarah had been a paralegal before the kids were born, and she had a sharp eye for legal nonsense. We watched through the window as Emma and Josh examined each snowman, Murphy bounding through the snow around them. "What's the next step?" Sarah asked. "County surveyor comes tomorrow morning at 9. We'll get official confirmation of the property line, and then Jim can figure out what to do about the HOA's claim." That night, around 11, I was woken up by headlights sweeping across our bedroom window. I got up and looked outside to see a truck I didn't recognize parked at the curb. 2 guys got out, both wearing coveralls, and started walking toward my Snowman Army with shovels. I was outside in my pajamas and boots in about 15 seconds, my phone already dialing 911. "Hey," I shouted. "What are you doing?" The guys stopped. One of them, a younger kid who couldn't have been more than 20, looked nervous. The other, older and heavyset, held up a piece of paper. "We've got a work order from the HOA to remove unauthorized structures from common property," he said. "Those aren't on common property and you're not touching them. I've already called the police." "Look, man, we're just doing our job. The HOA hired us to clear this area." At 11 at night, the younger guy spoke up. "She said it had to be done tonight. She's paying us double." "She, meaning Brenda Patterson," they both nodded. I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. The older guy swore and headed back to the truck. "Not worth it, man. She didn't say anything about police." They drove off just as an Edna police cruiser pulled up. Officer Janet Miller got out, and I recognized her from a neighborhood watch meeting we'd had the previous summer after a string of car break-ins. "Alex, what's going on?" I explained the situation, showed her the pictures I'd quickly snapped of the truck and the two guys, and forwarded her the license plate number I'd managed to capture. She took notes and looked at my Snowman Army with an expression that suggested she was trying very hard not to laugh. "So the HOA president hired people to destroy your snowmen because she thinks they are on HOA property, even though you have documentation that they are on your land. That's the situation, yes. And you have a surveyor coming tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. She finished her notes. "Okay, I'll file a report about the attempted destruction of property. If those guys come back, call us immediately. In the meantime, I'd suggest setting up some cameras pointed at your yard just in case." I thanked her and went back inside. Sarah was awake, having heard the commotion. "This is insane," she said. "She tried to have your snowmen destroyed in the middle of the night." "Our snowmen," I corrected. "And yeah, apparently she did. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night." At 6 in the morning, I was up and installing the motion-activated security cameras I'd been meaning to set up for months. By the time the county surveyor arrived at 9, I had 3 cameras covering the entire Snowman Army and the disputed property line. The surveyor was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen. She'd brought 2 assistants and a lot of equipment. Sarah brought them all coffee while I explained what we needed. "I've got your original survey from 3 years ago," Margaret said, pulling up documents on her tablet. "And I've got the county records. Let me set up and we'll get you definitive measurements." It took them about 2 hours. Margaret and her team carefully measured, used GPS equipment, and consulted what looked like very official documents. While they worked, a small crowd gathered. Several neighbors came by, curious about what was happening. I explained the situation to each of them, and I was gratified to see that most of them looked shocked at what Brenda was trying to pull. Tom Wainwright, who lived 3 doors down, was particularly vocal. "She's trying to claim part of your lot. That's theft, plain and simple." "We're getting it officially documented now," I said. Brenda herself showed up around 11, pulling up in her minivan with her usual dramatic flair. She marched over to Margaret, who was taking measurements near the old survey stakes. "Excuse me, who authorized this survey?" Margaret didn't even look up. "The property owner. Same person who authorized the original survey. Everything's in order." "Those measurements are going to show that the HOA has rightful claim to this buffer zone," Brenda insisted. Now Margaret did look up, and her expression was withering. "Madam, I've been a licensed surveyor in Minnesota for 37 years. The county records are very clear about where Lot 247 ends and Lot 248 begins. If your HOA has different information, then your HOA's information is wrong." "We'll see about that," Brenda huffed, but she backed off, standing by her minivan and glaring at everyone. By noon, Margaret had her final measurements. She came over to where Sarah and I were standing with the kids, who'd been fascinated by all the surveying equipment. "Okay," Margaret said, showing us a detailed plot map she'd drawn up. "The property line is exactly where your original survey said it was. These stakes here," she pointed to the old wooden stakes I'd been using as reference points, "are accurate to within 2 inches. Your snowmen are all well within your property boundary. In fact, you've got about 10 feet of clearance between your closest snowman and the actual property line." "And the HOA's claim about the buffer zone?" Sarah asked. "The description in their meeting minutes shows a property line that's 15 feet into your lot." "That's not correct according to any county records, current or historical. Someone either made a significant error in transcribing the property description, or they deliberately falsified it. Brenda had been close enough to hear this. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. That's impossible. We hired a professional to do those measurements. Then I'd suggest you contact that professional and ask them to explain the discrepancy, Margaret said calmly. Because according to every legal document on file with Hennepin County, the HOA has no claim to any portion of Lot 247. I thanked Margaret and paid her for the survey. She promised to file the official results with the county by end of business and to send copies to me and to Jim Morrison. After Margaret left, Brenda stood by her minivan for a long moment, her expression cycling through various emotions. Finally, she got in and drove away without another word. "Is it over?" Emma asked, tugging on my coat. "I don't think so, sweetie," I said honestly. "But we're going to make sure everything gets fixed properly." I was right. It wasn't over. That evening, I got an email from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Frost from a firm in Minneapolis. The email was full of legal language, but the basic message was clear. The HOA maintained its position that the buffer zone included part of my property, and they were prepared to take legal action to enforce their rights. I forwarded the email to Jim, who called me 20 minutes later, and he was actually laughing. "These people are out of their minds," he said. "They've got no legal standing here. None. Your survey is correct. The county records back you up, and they're threatening to sue you for building snowmen on your own property. So what do we do?" I'm going to draft a response that very politely explains how wrong they are, and suggests that they might want to investigate how their meeting minutes ended up with an incorrect property description. I'm also going to point out that attempting to steal someone's property, even through HOA overreach, is a crime in Minnesota. You think they actually tried to steal it? I think someone screwed up, and now Brenda's in too deep to admit it. But yes, if they knew that property description was wrong and filed it anyway, that's fraud. That's filing false documents related to property ownership. That's a real crime with real consequences. The next few days were relatively quiet. Sarah went back to work at her part-time job at the library. The kids went back to school, and I returned to my normal work routine. The Snowman Army stood sentinel in the yard, slowly accumulating more snow from another light storm that blew through. On Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the surveyor's visit, I got a registered letter from the HOA's attorney. This one was more aggressive, demanding that I remove the structures from the disputed property within 72 hours or face legal action. Jim's response was swift and brutal. He sent a letter back, copied to the entire HOA board and their attorney, laying out the facts. My property survey was accurate. The county records confirmed it. The HOA's property description was wrong, and if they continued to pursue this matter, we would file a countersuit for harassment, attempted property theft, and legal fees. He also dropped a bomb I hadn't expected. He'd done some digging into the HOA's meeting minutes from 2 years ago and discovered that the person who had conducted the survey for the buffer zone extension wasn't actually a licensed surveyor. He was Brenda's brother-in-law, Carl Patterson, who worked in construction but had no surveying credentials or authority to establish legal property boundaries. That explained a lot. The response from the HOA board was a scheduled emergency meeting for Thursday evening, which all homeowners were invited to attend. The agenda had one item: discussion of common area property boundaries. Sarah and I both went, leaving the kids with Tom Wainwright's teenage daughter. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. When we arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. Apparently, word had spread about the property dispute, and people were interested. The 5 board members sat at a table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Gregory Hoffman, a retired dentist, sat to her right. Linda Richardson, who taught at the local middle school, was on her left. Michael Torres, who'd voted against the buffer zone extension, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Susan Fleming, the other no vote, looked angry. About 40 homeowners filled the seats. I recognized most of them from neighborhood events over the years. Brenda called the meeting to order and started to speak, but Susan cut her off. Before we begin, I want it on the record that I voted against the buffer zone extension 2 years ago specifically because I had concerns about the property descriptions. I asked at that time for us to hire a licensed surveyor to verify the measurements, and my request was voted down 3-2. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Brenda's face flushed. That's not relevant to tonight's discussion. It's absolutely relevant, Michael Torres said, speaking up. I also voted no for the same reason. And now we find out that Carl Patterson, who has no surveying license, was the person who provided the property measurements we used. Brenda, your brother-in-law provided those measurements. That's a conflict of interest at minimum. Carl has 20 years of construction experience, Brenda snapped. But he's not a licensed surveyor, Jim Morrison said from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood up, holding a folder. I'm Jim Morrison, Mr. Norris's attorney. I have here copies of the complaints filed with the county about falsified property records related to Lot 247 and Lot 248. The room went silent. Brenda's expression changed from defensive to panicked. Falsified, someone in the crowd said. Jim continued. The property description used in the HOA meeting minutes from 2 years ago shows a boundary line that does not match county records, has never matched county records, and appears to have been deliberately altered to extend HOA common space 15 feet into private property belonging to my client. This is property fraud, and it's a crime under Minnesota law. Gregory Hoffman stood up, and he looked genuinely shocked. I voted yes on that measure because Brenda assured us the measurements were accurate. I had no idea Carl wasn't licensed. I assumed we were using a professional. Linda Richardson also stood. Same here. Brenda, you told us everything was properly documented. Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times. I didn't know. Carl said he could do the measurements. He's done work like this before for his company. Taking measurements for a construction project is not the same as establishing legal property boundaries, Jim said. And filing those incorrect measurements as part of an official HOA vote, then attempting to enforce restrictions based on them, constitutes fraud. This is ridiculous, Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was an honest mistake. Was it an honest mistake when you hired people to destroy Mr. Norris's property in the middle of the night? Sarah spoke up from beside me. Because there's a police report about that. More murmurs. Tom Wainwright stood up. You did what? I explained about the 2 guys with shovels who'd shown up at 11 at night with a work order from the HOA. Several people pulled out their phones, presumably to look up the police report, which was public record. Brenda sat down heavily in her chair. I just wanted to maintain neighborhood standards. That's my job as HOA president. Your job is to follow the law, Susan Fleming said coldly, and to act in good faith on behalf of all homeowners. You've done neither. The meeting devolved into arguments and accusations after that. Several homeowners demanded Brenda's resignation. Others wanted to know if their property descriptions were also wrong, if the HOA had been making other decisions based on faulty information. Gregory and Linda both stated they'd been misled and called for an independent audit of all HOA property records. Eventually, Jim stood up again and the room quieted. "I have a suggestion." The HOA can acknowledge that an error was made, correct all records to reflect accurate property boundaries, formally apologize to Mr. Norris, and reimburse him for his legal fees and surveying costs. In return, Mr. Norris agrees not to pursue criminal charges or a civil lawsuit. However, this is contingent on the current board conducting a full review of all property-related decisions made in the past 5 years and correcting any other errors that are found. "And Brenda resigns," Michael Torres added. "That's non-negotiable." I looked at Sarah, who nodded. I stood up. "That's acceptable to me. I never wanted this to become a huge fight. I just wanted to build snowmen on my own property without being harassed about it." The vote was swift and unanimous, with Brenda abstaining. She would resign effective immediately. The HOA would correct all records. I would be reimbursed for my costs, and a full audit would be conducted. Jim would draft the formal agreement, and we'd all sign it within a week. Brenda left the meeting without speaking to anyone. I actually felt a little bad for her, until I remembered she'd tried to have my snowman destroyed, and had been perfectly willing to steal part of my property to enforce her vision of neighborhood aesthetics. But the story wasn't quite finished yet. 2 days after the meeting, I was working in my home office when I saw a police car pull up outside. Officer Miller got out, along with another officer I didn't recognize. They went to Brenda's house, which was at the far end of our cul-de-sac. I tried not to be nosy, but 20 minutes later, I saw Brenda being led out in handcuffs. I called Jim immediately. "What happened?" "You didn't hear this from me," Jim said, "but apparently the county investigation into the falsified property records turned up some other irregularities." Brenda had been collecting dues for common area maintenance that was never performed, and the money was going into an account controlled solely by her. They're estimating she embezzled about $40,000 over 3 years. I let out a low whistle. "That's a felony." "Several felonies, actually. Property fraud, embezzlement, filing false documents. She's going to be in serious trouble." "What about Carl, her brother-in-law? They're investigating him too. If he knowingly provided false measurements to help her steal property, he's also looking at charges." The news spread through the neighborhood rapidly. By that evening, everyone knew that Brenda had been arrested. The general sentiment was shock mixed with a fair amount of schadenfreude. Apparently, Brenda had been making people's lives miserable with petty HOA violations for years, and nobody was particularly sad to see her face consequences. The HOA audit, conducted over the next month by an independent firm, revealed even more problems. Brenda had been authorizing expenditures without board approval, had been selectively enforcing rules against people she didn't like while ignoring violations by her friends, and had indeed been skimming money from the maintenance budget. The total amount of her theft came to nearly $60,000 when everything was calculated. Michael Torres was elected interim president, and one of his first acts was to formally apologize to me in writing and to present me with a check covering all my legal fees, surveying costs, and an additional amount for emotional distress and harassment. It came to about $8,000, which seemed fair. Sarah and I used some of that money to take the kids on a weekend trip to the Mall of America, where Josh got a Lego set he'd been wanting and Emma picked out new books from the store. The rest went into the college fund. Brenda eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years probation, plus full restitution to the HOA. Carl Patterson was charged as an accessory and received probation and community service after cooperating with prosecutors. the new HOA board implemented a series of reforms. All financial transactions now required dual approval. Property-related decisions required certified professional surveys, and homeowners were given much more flexibility in personalizing their properties as long as they met basic maintenance standards. The neighborhood became noticeably more relaxed and friendly. As for my Snowman Army, it stood proudly on my property until the March thaw finally claimed the last of them. Emma had named several of them, including one she called Sir Frosty the Brave, who'd been positioned right at the property line, the first line of defense against HOA overreach. The empty lot next door, Lot 248, was purchased that spring by a young couple with a toddler. Dave and Melissa Young were friendly, normal people who thought the whole Snowman saga was hilarious. We helped them settle in, and their daughter became fast friends with Emma. The following winter, when the first big snow came, Dave came over with a proposition. Want to build a snowman army that spans both our yards, really give the HOA something to talk about. Sarah and I looked at each other and grinned. Only if we can build twice as many as last year, I said, and we did. 94 snowmen, spanning across both properties. A frozen testament to the fact that sometimes the best way to deal with petty tyranny is to stand your ground, know your rights, and not be afraid to get a lawyer who knows what he's doing. The new HOA board, to their credit, sent us a letter saying the snowmen were a charming display of winter creativity that brings joy to the neighborhood. They even featured our snowman village in the neighborhood newsletter, with pictures and a story about how communities thrive when people are allowed to express themselves. Tom Wainwright painted his mailbox purple. The Johnsons 2 streets over put up a decorative fence that probably violated 6 old HOA rules, but nobody cared. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman at the corner lot, planted wildflowers instead of the approved grass blend, creating a beautiful pollinator garden that attracted butterflies all summer. Meadowbrook Heights became the kind of neighborhood we'd hoped it would be when we moved in. A place where people could live their lives without constant fear of violation notices and arbitrary rules. The HOA still existed, and still managed the genuinely communal aspects of the neighborhood like snow plowing and streetlight maintenance. But they'd learned an important lesson about respecting property rights and treating homeowners like adults. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that after she served her sentence, she moved to a small town in Wisconsin to live with her sister. Apparently, she'd learned her lesson about overstepping boundaries, both literal and figurative. Every winter since then, when the first snow falls and my kids start agitating to build snowmen, I think about that January when a simple creative project turned into a battle over property rights and exposed corruption in our HOA. I think about how close Brenda came to getting away with her schemes, how the pressure and harassment might have worked if I hadn't had good legal advice and documentation. I also think about all the other homeowners in all the other neighborhoods who might not be as lucky, who might not know their rights or might not have the resources to fight back against HOA overreach. It's a reminder that these associations, which are supposed to protect property values and maintain communities, can easily become tools of petty tyranny if nobody holds them accountable. But mostly, when the snow falls, I think about the simple joy of building snowmen with my kids, of creating something fun and temporary and harmless. And I'm grateful that we live in a place where that's not just allowed but celebrated. Murphy, now a bit grayer around the muzzle, still loves to bound through the snowman construction zones, occasionally knocking over our work with his enthusiastic tail wags. Emma, now 11, has gotten quite sophisticated in her snow sculpture techniques, creating elaborate designs that are honestly better than anything I ever managed. Josh, at 13, pretends he's too cool for snowmen but always ends up helping, especially with the structural engineering aspects of the larger pieces. This past December, 5 years after the whole saga began, Sarah and I hosted a neighborhood holiday party. Michael Torres, still serving as HOA president and doing a great job, gave a toast. "To good neighbors," he said, raising his glass. "To knowing when to stand up for what's right and to snowmen. May we never forget the Great Snowman War of January 2020, which taught us all that property rights matter, that documentation is your friend, and that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is building something joyful and refusing to back down." Everyone cheered. We ate cookies and drank hot chocolate and told stories. The young family from Lot 248 brought their daughter, who was now 6 and already planning next winter's snowman designs with Emma. New families who'd moved in asked about the legendary Snowman Army, and we showed them pictures. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were in bed, Sarah and I stood at our front window looking out at the yard, now covered in a fresh blanket of snow that sparkled under the streetlights. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, leaning against me. "If Brenda had just left you alone, none of her crimes would have been discovered. She'd probably still be president, still stealing money, still making everyone miserable." "The snowmen brought her down," I said. 47 frozen warriors who accidentally exposed corruption. "You should write a book about it. Nobody would believe it. You'd be surprised. HOA horror stories are apparently a whole genre." We stood there for a while longer, comfortable in the silence and the warmth of our home. Murphy snored softly on his bed. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a snow plow rumbled by, keeping our streets clear. I thought about all the ways the situation could have gone differently. How if I'd just given in and torn down the snowmen, Brenda would have won. How if I hadn't kept good records and hadn't been able to afford legal help, my property rights would have been violated. How if the other board members hadn't eventually done the right thing, or if the county hadn't taken the fraud seriously, justice might not have been served. But it had worked out. The system, for all its flaws, had functioned. Bad actors had faced consequences. A community had been improved, and I'd gotten to build a ridiculous number of snowmen with my family, which had been the point all along. The next morning, I woke up to find that it had snowed another 6 inches overnight. Before I'd even had my coffee, Emma and Josh were already outside, marking out positions for this year's snowman construction project. I bundled up and went out to join them, Murphy bounding ahead of me. The air was crisp and clean, the snow was perfect for packing, and my kids were laughing as they rolled giant snowballs across the yard. "Where should we put the first one?" Emma called out. I looked at the old survey stakes, still visible as small markers at the property line, a permanent reminder of the battle we'd won. "Anywhere on our property you want," I called back. "We've got plenty of room." And we did. We had our space clearly marked and legally protected. We had a neighborhood that had learned from its mistakes. We had an HOA that actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. And we had a family tradition of building elaborate snowman displays that brought joy to everyone who saw them. Not bad for a software developer who just wanted to make good use of some snow and free time. As I helped Josh lift a massive snowball into place for what would become the base of this year's centerpiece snowman, which he'd already declared would be at least 10 feet tall, I realized that the whole experience had taught me something important about standing your ground and fighting for what's right, even when it seems easier to just give in. Sometimes the battles worth fighting are the ones that seem small or silly from the outside. Sometimes protecting your right to build snowmen on your own property is really about protecting everyone's right to live their lives without arbitrary interference. Sometimes taking on a bully, even one with official authority, is the only way to stop them from hurting others. And sometimes, just sometimes, an army of snowmen is exactly what you need to win a war.